Prior to 9/11, my dad had gone through numerous rounds of chemotherapy, radiation treatment, and was losing a lot of weight, slowly dying. And in that summer, I had lost a car that I had owned. The engine blew up August 17th of that year. It was Friday afternoon, I'll never forget it. 2 days prior to the 9/11 attack, my great-uncle Joe had died, and after complications of various illnesses. And that brings us up to that Tuesday morning. And it's something that I had long regretted. I finally found peace with it years later. But I was so overwhelmed by all the stuff that was going on in my life that summer that I decided I just needed a couple of personal days just to have some sense of normalcy. And what I did was I took that Monday and Tuesday off. Because at that point I worked at Crest Radio, and I worked some crazy ass. Sundays, at that point, I was working the afternoon shift from 1 to 8 o'clock. Okay. Monday and Tuesday, I worked the overnight shift, which was 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. That in of itself is not so bad. It's Wednesdays that really hurt, because I'd get off at 6 o'clock Wednesday morning, sleep for a few hours, then come back in at 3 and work till 11. And a lot of times, I was fighting fatigue, I was exhausted, and this went on for years. And I was stupid to stay on that schedule. I should have demanded better hours, but I felt that I was entitled to working there, and that I was entitled to better hours, because radio is a very ego-driven business, no matter what market you're in. But I'll save that discussion for another time. So I was fighting that kind of fatigue. So between dealing with my own sleep deprivation and the fact that my love life was DOA, has been pretty much since day one, that's my own doing, and then dealing with my dad's terminal illness after years of substance abuse, I was exhausted, and I just needed a little bit of a break. I don't remember what I did for a vacation. I do remember finding out my Uncle Joe had died that Monday morning, that Monday afternoon. Well, I had gone to sleep maybe about 12:30, 1 o'clock that morning, something like that. I get a phone call just before 9 o'clock that Tuesday morning from an old friend of mine from college. And he had told me that the Twin Towers had just been hit. And this was after the second plane had hit. And at first I thought, this is really a sick joke. And pretty soon I realized he's not kidding, that this is the genuine article. Because normally I could tell in his voice when he was kidding and when he's not. And at that point I realized this is the real thing. And I didn't watch much TV at home at that point. As a matter of fact, I don't think I even had it hooked up other than to my VCR. I didn't have a DVD player yet. Well, anyway, as we were talking, and he was catching me up on what was happening, the Pentagon got hit. And we talked a little bit more, and then we hung up the phone. And I went to the internet, and I was having a hard time getting news updates because every news server was smashed. I mean, everybody trying to get information at once. So I turned on the radio, and I was listening to Crest, finding out what was going on. And I just couldn't believe what I was hearing, that we were effectively in a state of war, and we didn't even know at that point who the enemy was definitively. And I don't remember much about what happened that afternoon. I do remember at various times listening to reports and managing to get some updates on the internet, but for the most part, it's kind of a blur. Well, I got worried about gas shortages because there was fear that gas might be rationed, or at least I was worried about that possibility. And at that point, I was trying to keep my car fully fueled anyway. So I was down to about, I don't know, maybe a quarter tank, half tank, something like that. I had just enough fuel that I could get to Unionville in one trip without having to stop and refuel. So I decided, well, I'll go to Casey's in Huntsville. They were out of gas at that point. This was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and go to Moberly anyway. I drove to Moberly, got on Highway 24 where they had a Casey's. There were 2 Casey's at that time. The one I used the most was the one on 24, head west. Pull up there, and there are cars backed all the way down the street and along Highway 24 in all directions. And I thought, well, okay, I'll circle around. I got into line, and I waited probably for a good 25, 35 minutes before I even got to the pump. And while I was sitting there waiting to fuel up, I kept looking up at the sky and I'm thinking, there is no air traffic at all. Now, normally you see a straight jet, but of course by that point, all commercial traffic was shut down. And just the mood of the people, that there was this widespread fear, and you could feel it everywhere. And never in my life before or since have I felt that kind of fear. Now, generally, I'm an optimist when it comes to the future, even after a horrific event. But at this point, I feared the future. As I said, my love life was non-existent, DOA. My dad was dying. My career, for all intents and purposes, had reached its apogee at Clicks and Crests. And it'd be another 4 years when I would leave and go to KRX. And I remember thinking how my world seemed to be caving in at that point. Well, after I filled up, I went to Crest to see how things were going, see if they needed any help in the afternoon, because I figured there might be more stories they might need to get written or things like that to help out. My boss said, no, we got it taken care of, don't worry about it. You're on vacation, go home. And so I went home. But that's what I remember most about 9/11. Now, in the days after that, my mom told me about this, especially after my dad died, which would have been a month and 2 days later. At night, he would sit out on the porch or sit out in the yard. Now, at that time, sorry, my weather bug just kicked on. My parents lived outside of Unionville, Missouri, and looked straight south. At times, you would see jets flying out of Whiteman Air Force Base. Well, after it was announced that the United States was sending planes over to the Middle East to go after the assholes who were responsible for the terrorist bombings, my dad would look up in the sky and he could tell you what type of plane was flying over, roughly how many people were on board or that plane could hold, and its potential armament, just by looking at the contrails and so forth. That's one of the things I remember the most about 9/11. And also about my dad's warped sense of humor. A lot of people would take offense to this, and this is part of the reason why I have somewhat of a offbeat sense of humor, that my dad could find humor in any situation. Now, keep in mind, he wasn't one to poke fun at people dying or suffering, but he was outside working on things in the garage and in the shed and so forth that day of the attack, and he didn't know about it until probably early to mid-afternoon about the 9/11 attacks. Well, when I would go to visit him those last few weeks, about every time he would say something to the effect of, well, there's something that happened out east, I believe in New York, Washington. You might want to have Crest check that out. And I said, okay, Dad, I'll get right on that. But those are some of the strongest memories that I have about 9/11. And if you'd like to share with me your memories about what was going on in your life on that horrific day, email me at Gunther'sHouseOfFriends@gmail.com. Okay, that's Gunther'sHouseOfFriends@gmail.com. Well, fast forwarding to today, to more recent times. This is something I've been seeing on Facebook for the past several weeks, and I had a feeling there was more to the story than what was being told. As largely it was from Obama haters, and I'm not terribly surprised. I'm appalled by it, but I'm not surprised. It's about an urban legend floating around, and what I'm talking about is that President Obama denied bikers a permit to ride in Washington, D.C. on September 11th, 2013, but did allow Muslims the same privilege. Now, there's some truth to this, but there are also a lot of falsehoods to this. Well, let's flash back to February 2013. The American Muslim Political Action Committee, or AMPAC, announced they would be staging an event called the Million Muslim March, which they hoped would gather 1 million people in Washington, D.C. on September 11th, 2013, which happens to be the 12th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, to press the United States government into revealing the truth about those attacks. Okay? We want to hold President Obama accountable for his promises, his empty promises, a transparent government. March organizer Issa Hodge said, "What exactly have we spent all our money on, lost lives for, taken lives for? The entire record of the 9/11 Commission has never been fully released." Protesters will also denounce FBI traps, illegal tapping and surveilling of Muslim Americans, and media propaganda making the word terrorist synonymous with Muslim. Well, after negative public reaction, AMPAC changed the name of their event to the Million American March Against Fear, which they described as offering the following events. We invite you to stand with and join us to rally against fear at 12 noon on the National Mall, then the Congress, the Supreme Court, and the White House to hold truth to power at the three major branches of American government. We ask all individuals and organizations working for peace to attend this collective action, to tell our government leaders we want transparency and policies of peace. In the past 12 years since 9/11, the U.S. government has failed to protect and promote constitutional liberties and human life here and abroad. We feel that accountability in government has been ignored, and the time has arrived to collectively speak truth to power. Speaking will be experts and individuals on the lack of transparency and questions plaguing 9/11, steady erosion of domestic civil liberties, drone policy, and the very dire effect of these on the plight of American Muslims here at home and Muslim communities globally in the scope of U.S. imperialism and the modern face of resistance to unmanned aerial surveillance and warfare. Now, in August of 2014, just last month, motorcyclists began organizing bikers to D.C. counter-event, which they hoped would bring even larger numbers of bikers on a Washington ride-through to, quote, pay tribute and offer respect to those who lost their lives on that day 12 years ago, and to salute our troops engaged in the war on terror. However, the National Park Service, or NPS, has jurisdiction over the issue, and the NPS has declined to issue the group a no-stop permit that would facilitate the ride-through the nation's through Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, by granting them a police escort and a waiver for red lights, stop signs, and other traffic signals. The NPS cited traffic issues and manpower requirements in denying that request. The National Park Service confirms that it has denied the permit for the ride-only non-stop event after looking at it in terms of disruption and resource management. Spokeswoman Carol Johnson said the group's permit application was examined like all others using the Code of Federal Regulations. Johnson said the group had asked the ride-through for what's called Memorial Corps near the Memorial Bridge from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. with 2,000 motorcyclists. NPS decided that the large ride would require closures of important roadways, block access to Rock Creek and George Washington Parkways, and would cause a severe disruption to traffic. A police escort would also be needed. It's just a case of what they asked for in the permit applications, Johnson said. The Metropolitan Police Department said the group was asked to move its ride to the weekend when it would be less disruptive to traffic. Solely to facilitate the speed and timeliness of the participants in itself does not fall within the definition of a First Amendment assembly. That's according to